The brilliant thing out there, folks, is if you need some medical advice, read Susan Wiggs' book. A diagnosis awaits.
I've been using ChatGPT to just figure out what's wrong with me, but I guess
to see what that rash is.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Two Authors Podcast, an entertaining chat show hosted by best-selling mystery and thriller authors Douglas Pratt and Nicholas Harvey, in lively, humorous and informative conversation with distinguished guests who share their thoughts and experience about forging a successful author career.
Hello and welcome to this week's show. How you doing, Doug?
I'm good. Nick, how are you, sir?
Fantabulous. And the show is brought to you by our friends at Vellum, the best formatting solution in the whole wide author world.
It's great. Shockingly, I was just using it yesterday to format. I know it's weird because I'm almost always using it to format. So.
That's true. Yeah, it's the only thing we use to format. So what's fun is when this airs, we'll already have had a show with Brad West of Vellum that would have come out a week before this. So we're in the future. We are currently in the future. So I was going to tell you something cool about Vellum, but you know what? Last week, Brad would have told you lots of cool stuff about Vellum and tricks and what have you. So we'll roll with that. I'm going to give a shout out real quick to our friends Jamie Albright and Sarah Rosette of the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, who very kindly and mistakenly had me on their podcast the other week.
Yeah, that was a great show. I listened to it.
They're awesome. Yeah, they have a superb show. I really enjoyed chatting with them, so we'll stick a link to that in the show notes. Our guest today is New York Times bestseller Susan Wiggs, who we'll chat with shortly. But first of all, listener question. This is from Lily in the UK, and she asks, after listening to the show with Gillian McAllister, amazing lady, great show, what's the most you've ever deleted from a manuscript?
Oh,
not as much as Gillian.
Not as much as Gillian did. She was like dumping 80,000 words. Probably not tons. I may have taken out a couple thousand. I'll end up trying to add more than I have to take out. But how about you, sir?
I don't think I've ever taken that much out. I took out wrapping up The One Who Ran, which is book 3 in Cat Cromwell's series, which I just finished and sent to my editor. In the final chapter, I was probably 800 words into it. And I'm like, no, I want to do this differently. I didn't delete them. I cut and pasted into another place in Scrivener and then went back and started over. But that might be it to memory. That's probably the biggest thing. I've cut bits and pieces out, but I'll go in and rewrite. But generally I get a feeling when I'm going down a road of this isn't working, I am not that far in before I back up and start messing with it.
I think normally I have an idea where I'm going anyway. So, because I'm working, I tend to, you probably do the same thing. I tend to work that story. Even when I'm not working that story, I'll be, driving in bed, wherever I happen to be thinking about it. So it's already there. So generally I'm not taking out a lot of the story. I've already worked it out by the time I get to it. Now, I will say I have accidentally deleted about 5,000 words one time. So
I lost a whole manuscript once.
Oh, no, that would be terrible. Yeah,
it was my second book I ever wrote, and I lost it. And the only reason I was able to recover it was I had sent a copy to my then new editor, and he had that copy. And that was the only saving. A hard drive crash, new computer, and it crashed on the hard drive, and it wasn't set up on the cloud yet. Terrifying.
Yeah, mine was I did it. I used Pro Writing Aid, and one day Pro Writing Aid glitched on me. And for those people who don't know, you can use Pro Writing Aid is a great software, and it works right in Scrivener, but it also changes it in Scrivener, and it completely deleted everything, and I didn't realize it. And once you close it out, it saved it, and there was no I scoured through the backup files. It was brutal. I probably called you and cried a little bit when it happened. It's been a couple of years ago. I was sitting in a Starbucks when I realized what happened, and I was like,
crying in Starbucks.
Yeah, crying in Starbucks. Yeah. It's the way it works. So,
all right, let's get on to this week's guest. She's New York Times bestselling author of historical and contemporary romance fiction, Susan Wiggs, whose latest novel, Wayward Girls, we're saying releases as we are recording this, but it'll be released when you're hearing this because it came out on July 15th, about a week ago. Here's a couple of reviews I'm going to read you. After decades of bestsellers, Wayward Girls might be Susan Wiggs' opus. A gut-wrenching story of survival, friendship, and justice. Masterful, This chap named Robert Dugoni wrote that. You may have heard of Robert Dugoni. Pretty nice when you've got Dugoni writing blurbs for you. And then there's another one. Wayward Girls is all about the power of female bonds. This isn't just a moment in time. It's a cautionary tale. And that was from Jodi Picoult. So couple of good blurbs. I think it's a pretty solid book that's coming out.
I think it'll be a good book, yeah.
I think it will be.
I might have to read that one. So
yeah, let's chat with Susan now. Susan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Fill in our listeners a little bit on when you first started getting into writing and when you were first published.
Oh boy, I love this question because I actually have evidence that I was a writer and storyteller as a toddler. And the way that I know this is that I'm the middle of three kids, close in age. And I used to dictate stories to my mother as I scribbled on the paper. And, God love her, she would write them down. And they definitely were stories. And she saved a few of these scraps for me. So, decades later, I have evidence that I was a storyteller. And they were almost always about bad kids getting stuck up a tree or getting chased by a dog or, something like that.
That'll teach them to be mean to you in school, huh? You'll write them in a story up a tree.
Right. And there's never been a time when I didn't know that I was a storyteller. Of course, there was a long span of time before I realized, that I could make a living at it. So my first writings, of course, kid writings, schoolgirl writings were just, my practice phase. And when I decided to finally, pursue writing as a profession, as a métier, I was in graduate school and writing on the side. I was writing the kind of novels that I was reading in order to escape graduate studies. Really, really commercial, juicy fiction, historical romances, bodice rippers, thrillers, things like that. And so I always knew I was a very commercial writer. Indeed, that was the direction that I took early on. And I sold my first book in 1986. And it came out in 1987 before most people were born. And so...
not us.
No, we're good. Yeah, that's very sweet,
us.
But not the two of us. No, Nick's older than dirt, so...
I've been at it. Yeah, I've been at it for a while. And, like most working writers, it's a slow build. I didn't come out of the gate and have an instant overnight bestseller. There are a few examples of that, but, for most of us, you build on your body of work. And books in print just grows over time. I became a full-time writer in the 90s and moved to Bainbridge Island, Washington to pursue that. And it's been my profession ever since.
Wow, the changes you must have seen across this industry.
Yeah, when I look back, the changes are profound and they're also minimal. Because when I sit down to write a book, it's exactly the same. I will sit down and, dream up whatever story. And then I'm kind of famous. I know we're audio only, but here is my book manuscript right now.
Ooh, we're looking at the words of the book of her manuscript. Yeah. Take a screenshot real quick.
Handwritten, yes. That's crazy.
And this was a habit that I started probably the very first things that I wrote. I wrote in longhand because it was so long ago that you had to type things up. And I hated to type because I would always make an error and have to redo the page. And so I thought, well, I'll write it all out in longhand and then I'll do whatever corrections I need. And I'll only have to type it up once. And so that was one of my techniques that I dreamed up. Nowadays, I still do it. And it feels exactly the same as it did, 30 years ago. And so there are some things that never, ever change. It's always hard. It's always fun. It's always challenging. The reason that I still do it, I think, I don't understand my own, process sometimes. The reason that I do it now is I think it's a real commitment. When you are, writing, putting your ink on the page, there's no delete button. There's no pop-up saying, you've got mail or whatever. And so it's a real help for me because like most writers online, there are a million distractions. And so when I really want to focus and concentrate my efforts on the story, for me, writing it out by hand is probably a technique that keeps me focused as much as I can. I'm like anybody else. I'm distracted by the news and the weather and other things going on.
That's amazing. So we've had another guest on, Angela Marsons from the UK, who's a marvelous, wonderful thriller writer. And she does the same thing. She handwrites. So my next question is, because she shared with us how that process then builds to getting it down. Do you still then put it into a computer yourself, or do you have somebody else do it? Or does it go to your editor in handwritten?
Yeah, because I mentioned earlier, I hate to type, but I would do it. And I did try it one time having a typist, but I realized I was doing a lot of revisions as I would be typing up my manuscript. And so that didn't work for me. And so for a while, I just laboriously typed everything that I had written. Now the labor is gone because I was one of the very early adopters of dictation software. Now you don't need the software. You need your phone.
You just read the book into the phone and yeah, right.
Yes. And of course you've got to go over it and make your corrections to the dictation errors, but it's an enormous time saver. When I'm really going hard, I can dictate 10,000 words a day. It's not fun, especially if you have to say like all the punctuation and stuff like that. It's pretty tedious. But on the other hand, it's a huge labor saver for me.
I think I would twist myself up my own backside doing that. Don't you think, Doug?
I was going to say the punctuation would throw me off, I think, because I would be like, we know a few people who we've interviewed who do dictation on a regular basis, and I'm always amazed because I've given it a stab. Now you're at least writing it out first, which I think would probably help me because at least then I could.
Well, it would go like this. It would go, open quotes, oh, comma, Doug, comma, she said, comma, close quotes. And then she walked out the door, something like that.
But that's what I'm thinking. If I was doing that, I'd be reading, okay, open quotes. Oh, Doug, don't do that. Close quotes. Oh, no, that's stupid. I need to write. No, don't write that bit. Don't dictate. No, wait. And then it's just pages of me babbling in the middle that I've got to then take out.
But it's still not nearly as painful as sitting at a keyboard for me. I'm just not a keyboard person.
When this airs, your new book, Wayward Girls, will have come out last week. So
Wayward Girls. Here she is.
Beautiful cover.
Beautiful cover. That's a gorgeous cover too, man. I was looking at that earlier.
I always question my cover art until the book physically shows up in stores, and then sometimes I think it's kind of wah, looks like wallpaper. It's disappearing on the shelf. All the other brighter, prettier books are overshadowing it, and sometimes it really pops, and you have no control over that. It might be the standout book that people are intrigued by and pick up, or it might be, it might be overshadowed by something else that's brighter and shinier. And so cover art can make or break a book. Thank God for readers because their word of mouth is ultimately the arbiter of that. But initially, you have a nanosecond to grab somebody's eye in the bookstore. And nowadays, of course, they're very preoccupied with how it looks in a thumbnail. So July 15, we will see if it's going to be an effective cover or if it's going to have to wait for people to start reading and reviewing it.
Well, looking at the blurb on it on Amazon, I was like, wow, this looks a phenomenal story. So I have a feeling you're going to have no trouble making it a bestseller. But you had a little bit of a personal connection to it too. I mean, besides writing it, like everybody's like,
I do. Yeah. And I have to say it's an unusual book for me. I'm kind of known for the feel good beach books. I mean, they often have serious issues in the books, but they're definitely more recreational reading. And Wayward Girls is probably for me, it's the most entertaining book I've ever read or written, but my personal connection kind of made it a weightier subject. And so a little apprehensive to hear what my longtime readers, want to carry it around in their beach bags or if they want to, go off somewhere and read it. But I never thought that I would write a book like this, but it was triggered by a recovered memory. And usually I don't know where my books come from. They sort of are a conglomeration of all my different ideas. But this one, there was a moment I was in this very small town in Western New York, near Buffalo, New York, where the book takes place. I was there with my brother. We were kind of on a nostalgia trip to go visit the little small town of our youth. And we hadn't been there since we were kids because we moved away as kids. And we went to the church that we attended. It was big, grand, Gothic Catholic church. And we walked inside, and there's something I'm sure everybody has experienced when you walk into a space, there's a smell, there's an echo, there's something, it brings things flooding back. And I was really little. And I said to my brother, he's a couple of years older, I said, "You were an altar boy, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I was an altar boy for about 5 minutes before we moved overseas." And he was the one who swings it's called a thurible. It's a vessel that has the hot coals and the incense in it. And at high mass, he swings it down the aisle. You've probably seen, pictures. And a coal got out and his sleeve caught on fire. And I said, "Did that really happen?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it did." And so we kind of revisited that memory, which, by the way, made it into the book in a kind of a comical scene. But we started talking about the influence of the Catholic Church. Back then, it was a lot bigger presence in people's lives, I would say, 50 years ago than it is now. And then I started discussing with him, and he mentioned, we had this babysitter who went away. And in those days, when a girl is sent away, there's usually only one reason for that. She had an unplanned pregnancy. And then, I got to thinking about the role of the Catholic Church and the way it treats people. And so I did the deep dive that writers do. You go down a rabbit hole. I found myself, of course, starting where every good book starts, in the library, doing the research. And it took me down this path that led to a very dark place. The address is still there, 485 Best Street in Buffalo. And if people are curious to see what that's like, I think there's a little video pinned to the top of my Instagram feed, Susan_Wiggs_ on Instagram. There's an overview of it there. And that was the home for Wayward Girls. And it actually was. It was called The Good Shepherd. And that sort of broke open all of the research that I did, which of course led to me putting together a novel. And it was one of the few where the title never changed. Often you come up with a title for your book and the publisher doesn't like it, or somebody doesn't like it, or it's too similar to another title or something like that. But this one came out of a little news snippet. It was the headline, and it took place, I think, in the 1920s. And so my story starts in 1968. Buffalo was in turmoil with the Vietnam War protests and race riots and things like that. And yes, it was still kind of a homey town in New York. Not, I shouldn't say a town, it's a city, but it was near Niagara Falls. So out of that grew this just bonkers story that took over my life for a couple of years. I'm so pleased with it because it's one of those books where I think I delivered on my initial vision. A lot of times I disappoint myself. I'm like, it started out so good, but you screwed it up.
I say that every time I write a book. I'm like, well.
Nobody who reads it ever says that.
Probably you get asked a lot, and I get asked a lot, what's your favorite book that you've ever written? And I always say the next one, the one that I haven't spoiled for myself yet by writing it.
I always say the one I'm writing right now, actually.
It depends on where I am in the manuscript as to whether it's the one I'm writing right now or not. So if I'm in that muddy middle or towards before I get to the final end, I'm already like, oh my gosh, I just wish I could kill my main character and be done with it.
It's so bright and shiny when it's like a new toy. But you're right. When you get to I like your term, the muddy middle. It's when, why did I ever think this was a good idea?
How am I going to write myself out of this corner?
Right now, I've got to start a book, and Nick's starting a book too. We both are starting new books this week, and so I'm kind of excited about that because it's all like, hey, it's a new one. I'm going to get in and get excited and come up with the exciting incident.
I think what a lot of emerging writers, I don't call them aspiring because they should already be writing. So emerging writers need to remember is that their idea has to be so good that they're happy to spend all the hours and weeks and months that it takes to come back to the page every time, and when I mentor writers or teach a class or something like that, I find there's enormous energy to get started and write the first 17 pages. And then they play, a lot of people plateau. And so you need to push past your plateaus, just like an athlete.
Yeah, I actually had that same discussion with some, like you said, emerging authors who are like, I'm kind of tired of this. Can I move on to something else? It's like, no, you got to push through it. That depends on why you want to do it. But, if you really want to finish a piece, you got to keep writing or else it's never going to finish itself.
Yeah. One thing I was going to expand on there, you touched on memory and how that lost memory was kind of triggered, right? All that dusty stuff that's in the back of our minds. So the new series I'm writing has an element in there because she has a bit of a broken memory system and neurological issue. And it's fascinating to me. So over the years, I've done quite a bit of research on memory and how it works and how our brain actually does retrieve memories from deep memory and stuff like that. And we've all had that where we walk in somewhere, arrive somewhere, someone walks in the door, you see something on television, and there's that little ping, right? There's that recognition where you're like, wait a second, I know something about this, or I've seen that, and then the bits and pieces come coming back. And the analogy I use is there's a little desk clerk that runs down the steps into the basement and but they never grab the whole box. They grab a file out of the box and bring it back up, and they'll bring you a picture. It's like, that's it. I remember. That's how he looked. He looks just like that guy, but I can't think of his name. Back she gets down the stairs again and goes and fishes in the box and brings you something else back. It's fascinating.
Well, the human mind is such a wonder to me. And most of the reasons that we don't, keep every single thing that happened to us as a memory is it's clutter. A lot of it just needs to go in one ear and out the other. But there are some powerful triggers. And I actually just finished a book. It was called The Tell. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the author. It was a memoir. And she actually had a guided tour of her mind using, what's the drug? Is it MDMA?
DMT?
Yeah, there was some drug that it's a controlled substance. So you need to be, treated with a professional. She was guided back to recover some really kind of awful but powerful memories that ultimately convinced her that she was not going crazy, that this really happened or something like that. And so there are some ways that you can trigger it. But for me, it's always happened that, I walk into a church because, places like that, especially old places, have a distinctive atmosphere and smell and the air feels a certain way. So.
And I think, is that The Tell by Amy Griffin?
That's what it was. Yes.
I was going to say, he says that like he knows it, but he just looked it up.
Hey, Amazon, baby. It's amazing how fast we can grab something.
Yeah, it was probably super easy to look up because she's a remarkable person. She's, she actually was not a writer. This is her memoir about what happened to her, but she's a enormously successful, I think, hedge fund manager or some, really in tech or something. But this is her memoir, and it's a very uncomfortable story, but she had her memories triggered. I don't know. Sometimes I think they're in the past because that's where they're supposed to stay, but other times you need it for your recovery. And when I was writing Wayward Girls, that's actually because how do you write a good ending for girls that this happened to, girls who, were sexually assaulted, or girls who were, abused by nuns, or otherwise, there's a cast of characters and they each had kind of a different path. And how do you resolve that? And I think one of the pieces that made the ending just really emotional for me and so uplifting is that they combined their knowledge. It was only a year of their lives, but it affected the rest of their lives. And so the reason, the way that I made the book work and made it so uplifting in the end was their shared memories of this place and how they found their voice and ultimately reached for justice. And so it was another thing that came out of my research. The solution to the book came out of my research because I discovered how the Adult Survivors Act worked in the state of New York, and when they unsealed all adoption records in the state of New York. And so sometimes the research can feed, if you're looking for, and I often get stuck, I think up a pretty good story, but not a great resolution. So I was really lucky with this book, the actual things that came about, because of these situations in a lot of states, but especially in New York State. gave me the best ending to this book. I'm quite happy with the ending. So
I've got another question. Kind of jump back to your process. I know you're writing everything by hand. So listening to how you're talking about plotting this book out. I mean, are you a plotter, a pantser? Do you like know where the story is going before you sit down? Or
well, I think we just figured out she didn't know the ending to
She didn't know the ending.
Where it goes
well,
when she
like
started.
I can plot a story.
yeah, with this book, I didn't know exactly. I would say I'm a hybrid because I have a kernel of an idea and I do kind of suss out my story, beginning, middle, end. I don't do a ton of detail. We've probably all met writers who do, they'll do a 100-page outline. And I'm thinking, if I do a 100-page outline, that's just a book. Although this one was 500 pages. But I usually have to do a couple things. I have to pitch it to my literary agent and, indirectly or directly to my editor. And so when I do those two things, I'm already working out a story. And they're pretty tough customers. As you know, agents and editors don't suffer fools gladly, and they will poke holes in anything. Well, how are you going to accomplish that? Why would she do that? They question the motives and they question the direction of the story and they question the tone of the story. And so it's good because it's testing you. How committed are you to this story, or do I need to make adjustments? So I'm already plotting there. And
in the treatment, right? So you're providing a treatment for them.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much. And then the other thing that I do is I do a brainstorming plotting session with my writing group. And we're just a kind of a loose group of writers that we've known each other for years. And we love to swap stories and swap manuscript pages or whatever. And so I usually run things by them. And there's nothing, as you know, from this podcast and from knowing each other, there's nothing more gratifying than sitting down and talking shop with another writer.
That's the whole reason we do this, so that we have a chance to sit and talk to people.
Yes, exactly. Well, you're good because I'm still convinced that there is at least one writer out there who knows the secret, and she's holding out on us. I was hoping it was Sandra Brown, but she turned out to be, just as hardworking as the rest of us.
She is.
She just doesn't look like she works hard, right?
No. And she's a sweetheart. She came on the show a couple of months back. It was an absolute pleasure to meet her.
I enjoyed that, but it was, just because she looks like Sandra Brown doesn't mean she doesn't work her ass off like the rest of us. But I go through that, and then eventually I get down to actual, composing the book. And I like to think that I leave room for it to surprise me or to shoot off in another direction. And so that's the seat of the pants part. It's always a good sign, I think, when a character takes on a life of her own and she doesn't sound like you, or, he doesn't act like you thought he might in this role. But that's actually a good sign, because that means that your imagination has created something that's not you. It's separate from you. Because if it was all us, then, why have I written 60 books? They would all sound the same if it was all me, but every book is unique thanks to the characters that either you build them or they build themselves. So I'm probably, I would say, a hybrid. And I have changed endings. And with some books, the ending is delivered exactly as I thought at the beginning, and everywhere in between. So it's part of the mystery of writing, isn't it?
Do you believe in use the plot beats? Like I do the kind of the same thing where it's, I've got like a tentpole idea of everything. I think Nick's kind of the same way. We sound like we write the same way. We have an idea where the story's going, and then we kind of plot it a little bit. How consciously do you adhere to making sure you hit those points, or do you let the character go, no, she's going to completely veer off?
Yeah, you're right. It does take some discipline. I tend to overwrite, and then I need to pull back. And for me, it's easier to have too much material to work with. And it's remarkable how you can pare things down. Wayward Girls starts with a prologue that takes place in 2019 when adoption records were unsealed. And so initially I had so much information. I probably had, 1,000 words or something like that, where I was very preoccupied with the mechanics of it. And I showed it to my writers group, and somebody said the entire story is set up by these 3 pages. And so now there's a less than three page prologue that is much more intriguing. It's not bogged down with all of my rationalizations and things like that. And so I think but I'm much more comfortable having too much information and paring back from there.
So I have a question for you. So first of all, it's interesting and surprising to me that you have to sell a full treatment to your agent and your publisher at this stage. You've hit the New York Times bestseller list more than a few times. I mean, you have a track record, and yet you still have to sell them on the idea each time. So that was surprising to me to hear that. And so that raises the question, with all these successes under your belt and these fantastic books that you've written, do you still feel an anxiety when that new one comes out? You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what's that like through the writing process? Like, we all go through those curves of the writing process, but then when it's done and it's off and it goes through the editing stage and it's coming up to the period where we're talking now, your new book comes out a week from now. How's your mindset now?
I love this part because this is the moment when it's not my book anymore. And I used to be a teacher. That was my straight job before I started making a living at writing.
My real job when I wasn't doing this, yes.
Well, yeah, I always wanted to have a patron of the arts, but when I realized I couldn't find that, I just decided I needed a normal job. And so what I learned from being a teacher and also being a reader is that every reader reads a different book, because reading is such a creative activity. You bring yourself to the book. And so I love it. It's no longer my book. It's kind of like if you're in a plane crash, but you're in the back of the plane and it's crashing, it's not your fault. Which is kind of
now that is an analogy I didn't think I'd ever hear.
Right. Or if it gets to the gate on time and it's a perfect flight and everybody survives, it wasn't your fault either. You were just lucky, And so I call it releasing into the wild. The book goes out there and it's going to do what it's going to do. And I've written enough books and had enough feedback from readers and reviewers. Everybody reads a different book. Somebody might be eating granola for breakfast and had like a negative reaction to my book based on, something that they read in my book that I didn't even think about when I wrote it, or vice versa. It might be life-changing. And I have had those notes from readers where I wrote it was actually a romance novel called Lakeside Cottage. And it was very much a beach read. And this woman said, I didn't know what was happening to my teenage daughter. And I read your book and I realized she was suffering from diabetes. Just a random thing. It was something that happened to a character in my book. So it can be something as small as that I threw into the book for dramatic purposes, but it actually affected somebody. And with Wayward Girls, I've already heard from some early readers. It seems like everybody knows somebody. You guys are probably too young to know somebody like, in the 50s or 60s who had to go away or something like that. But they'll say, oh, yeah, my mother knew somebody who had to go to a home or something like that. And I'm already hearing from a few, and I'm hearing from a couple. There aren't not very many survivors that I was able to contact and who wanted to, talk about their experience. But from a couple of them, they're actually very excited to see this book. And I did listen. This is a book that the audiobook is read by two voices, Cynthia Farrell and Jane Oppenheimer. And I think it's because the book spans 5 decades, and so they wanted to change it up a little bit.
The age of the voice,
and I just listened to the audio, and it was really touching. It's a really nice performance, and in the audio, there's also of interest to writers. There's a conversation at the very end between me and my editor Rachel Kahn at William Morrow Books, where we talk about the process of writing this book. And
that's a great bonus to the audio.
It is. I was so pleased that we were able to do it. And it gave me much more new respect for narrators. It's more exhausting than you would think to sit there and focus and produce this recording. You guys are more experienced because of your podcast, but I read the author's note in the end and the acknowledgement page, and then there's a conversation. So that was my contribution to the audiobook. And I've never had that opportunity before.
The brilliant thing out there, folks, is if you need some medical advice, read Susan Wiggs' books. A diagnosis awaits.
I've been using ChatGPT to just figure out what's wrong with me, but I guess
to see what that rash is.
Yeah.
It was that one minor detail that we writers do. We find one little telling detail. And I wrote that book many years ago, but there was a detail that is a hallmark of diabetes, which is a darkening of the skin under your arms. And I didn't know that, but there was something that the plot called for this girl to have some kind of issue. And for some reason, that was the one that I used. And it was really subtle. But anyway, it kind of tweaked it with this one reader. And so, yeah, very inadvertent.
It is amazing what readers will pick up on sometimes. And I think that's the important part about adding some of those details, adding just things that other people might relate to, even if it doesn't relate to us.
Well, I think that might be our first line of defense against artificial intelligence writing books, because a writer will come up, I can't imagine that ChatGPT could have come up with a small, telling human detail that feels authentic. They can put words together, and you can even say, write a scene of two people meeting on a train in the style of Susan Wiggs, or, something like that. And it will put together a narrative like that, but it doesn't quite, it sounds off. And I think readers are a lot smarter than that.
So we have another question we ask everybody here. So it's a very simple one, but we're kind of curious what you think your author superpower is.
My author superpower is absolutely clear. It is that I will never take no for an answer. Before I sold my first book, as writers do, I sent out queries to literary agents and publishers. Sometimes I directly contacted publishers for about probably 2 years, which I'm told is a shorter time than normal. But, I was very impatient. I was in my 20s. And so, I was very impatient for something to happen. But I actually stopped counting the rejections after 100. So it was more than 100 rejections. It didn't bother me. I just thought every rejection that I had meant that I had to go knock on another door. I was willing to do that for as long as it took. And in my case, it took just a couple years, which is, like I said, I think that's less than normal. It felt like forever to me.
Well, the average is forever. That's the average of people that queries. The average is actually forever, because most of them don't get anything. Actually getting a deal puts you in the small percentile.
I do hear some writers say, I'm so frustrated. I'm going to give up. And that never even crossed my mind. What? Stop writing. I love to write, I live to write. And so that never felt like an option. I do think I would write whether or not I was published, but being published is a validation for a certain kind of writer. Some people just need to write no matter what. And that's a perfectly valid reason to write. But for me, I'm a storyteller, so I want to be that one sitting around the fire, telling the stories. And so having an audience is sort of key to my well-being as a writer.
I don't want to get a real job, so.
Yeah, exactly. It allows us to do this for a living. Right?
I don't want to have to go back to work. That would be too much. So.
All right, one final question, and then we'll let you go. This has been brilliant. Thank you. And Doug will dig out our wheel of questions and give it a whirl.
Oh, look. No way. I love that. Okay, you guys need to go on YouTube, because you guys are really fun to watch as well as to talk to.
Well, we try. So, all right, mostly we do this for the sound effects.
Okay. Well, for your audience, it looks like, a target or the Wheel of Fortune or something.
It's like a Wheel of Fortune, yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to come up with some questions.
Oh, yeah. So we do some random questions. And so this one is, if you could go back in time, any one day in history, where would you go?
I guess I'd like to go back to a day in history, maybe when my family, it would be a personal history. Maybe when my family, we were like babes in the woods. We arrived in Brussels, Belgium, in, I think, 1969, 3 kids and mom and dad. And we came from the smallest of small towns in Western New York. I would love to go back and just relive that day in history when we were walking into this Gothic Grand Place in the middle of Brussels and just starting a new life. I don't know. There was just some energy in that. So that, yeah, but that's a very intriguing question. I got to think about that.
All right. This has been magnificent. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. And Wayward Girls is going to be a huge hit, another New York Times bestseller. Absolutely. So
yes, please. Okay. Yes. Thank you for being Team Susan Wiggs this week.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was great, man. She's got some good stuff.
Superb.
Man, it's always nice to talk to somebody who does kind of like what we do with this whole mixture of plotting and pantsing. And I think, oftentimes people think it's either one or the other. It's black or white. And I just don't believe that's the case. I think that we all tend to see, especially any writer of any sort, is going to do some plotting, even if it's like you say, in your head or whatever. So it's nice to see other people doing it and kind of breaking down exactly what it is.
As we love to say, there's no one way of doing this. And I think for the most part, most people are somewhere in between the two. You got your our mate Dee Dee Black who plots the heck out of the whole thing. And then there's others like our mate Wayne. He just pantsers it from beginning to end. Cap does the same thing. But, I truly believe, and there's some people that truly believe, they sit down and they it's just a blank page and it's stream of consciousness. They just start going. I know Wayne's real interesting. He always starts on the second chapter because he doesn't know what the inciting incident is going to be in the first one. Yeah. He just jumps in with his character and starts chatting about him being on his island and what he's up to. And then it starts coming to him and then he'll go back and fill in that first one. So those pure pantsers like that, at some point they start plotting mentally, right?
How do you turn? Unless you could turn it off. Like I couldn't turn it off. It's always in my head when I'm writing.
Yeah, but you start a new story every chapter, so it's at different levels all over the place, and you just got to find what works best for you. And I find personally that it varies. I have some where I've got a lot of it plotted and planned out, and then there's others where I've got the opening planned out and then I'm going to see where it goes, or I've got the ending I know I want to get to, and then you start filling it in as you go. But just do you, right? Whatever works best for you.
Totally. Yeah. Like I do mostly plot my Corsair series, but I almost generally pants my Chase series completely. So it just kind of depends which ones you're doing. So
thanks to Susan. That was a lovely chat with her. So our new thing, support us on Patreon, folks. Help support the show. We really appreciate it. For the price of a cheap cup of coffee at Starbucks, you can support us monthly. Patreon.com/The Two Authors Podcast. We really appreciate that. You'll also get a shout out on a future show if you do it. Big thanks to our friends at Vellum. And last week we had Brad on the show. Wasn't that great? Fantastic.
He was great. Yeah. Very, very educational. Helps. Yeah. Go check them out at tryvellum.com/two authors to find out more. You'll find that Vellum link in the show notes. If you remember last week, he said you can just get in there and test it out and play with it. You just can't generate just quite yet. So good chance to go play with it. So check out our show notes for the links for our guests, our books, our social media, as well as our Patreon. And then look for new episodes every 2 weeks. Well, no. Look at me.
No. Every week. I didn't update the little scripty bit there, did I? Every week. We're coming at you every week. Put your shields up. Pull your blinds down. We're coming. All right. Until next time, be cool to each other.
And fair winds and following seas.
You've been listening to the Two Authors Podcast with Nicholas Harvey and Douglas Pratt. Subscribe on your favorite platform for alerts on new shows coming every 2 weeks.